Hi, I'm Bess Ho, the moderator. Welcome to our investment panel. I would like to introduce our panelist, Jay Nam, Managing Partner of GFT Ventures. Jay is a VC with 20 years of extensive investment experience. Jay co-founded TransLink Capital, a Palo Alto-based early-stage VC firm. He lead investment in AI, fintech, blockchain, and consumer technology. Prior to TransLink, Jay was the managing director of Samsung Ventures. His portfolio includes 5 IPOs and 5 M&A. Jay started his VC career at Vertex Management, Singapore-based VC arm of an investment firm. His portfolio includes PayPal. Jay received an MBA from Stanford University, a MS/BS in chemistry from Seoul National University. Jay served as a chairman and board director of Asia American Multi-Technology Association, AAMA. Jay is also an active angel investor and advisor to many startups. You have a long list of impressive exit and IPOs. Can you explain your secret as a lead investor and you go by a work checklist or Excel number crunching models?
No. So, by the way, Edward, thank you for sharing those details. Being an investor in some of these hardware companies, you actually tend to neglect all those additional cost items and details that the entrepreneur should be well aware of, and it's actually always great to hear that reminder. Bess, thank you first of all for inviting me to this opportunity. In terms of investments, it's very flattering that the things that you said, it's actually not necessarily true. And some of the companies that you listed up in your presentation as successes were actually not successes, where some of the companies failed and we lost money on. But I think in general, and this is not just for the hardware category, excuse me, but in general, I think the things that I've concluded over my 20 years of investing that I look for, again, you look for all the basics, right? So you look for the market opportunity, you make sure the technology and the product is the right fit, you make sure the team is solid. Um, but for me, the most important element among all of those is really at the end of the day, the founder, the entrepreneur. And for the entrepreneur, a long list of attributes are important, but for me, almost the most important thing for me that I've learned over time is somebody that has raw intelligence in abundance, somebody that you meet and are immediately impressed by their intelligence, their understanding of the market, the problem statement, and the approach that they're taking to solve that problem. And so, on the basis of raw intelligence, the second level is problem solving skills. No individual, I think, can be brilliant at everything. And so at the end of the day, the founder needs to supplement with other people that can bring different skill sets and experiences that the founder obviously doesn't have. And that's a problem, right? So solving the ability to solve that problem, the ability to identify the issue, find the solution, those are all problem solving skills. And I think the entrepreneur on a daily basis is constantly problem solving. So somebody that has demonstrated the ability to problem solve, I think, is important. And then finally, if the founder actually has what I would call charm and the attractiveness to almost has a magnetism where people are drawn to this person. And that's important because at the end of the day, a business is really built upon two pillars. One is people, the other is capital. And the ability for an intelligent founder that has problem solving skills, but also has the charm and the vision and the charisma to attract other people to join them for the journey. And as an investor, those are the people that I'm naturally attracted to. I'm curious how this particular individual is going to solve this issue and actually execute on what they're trying to do. And that's when I actually want to get involved as an investor to participate in that journey with that founder.
Echo Jay's point. So when you do a startup, it's a team sport. It's no longer a singles match for tennis. So it's all about the team.
Yeah.
And why Jay mentioned about charisma is the founder has the charisma to attract and persuade co-founders. So oftentimes it's very difficult to be a single founder of a startup company, right? So a lot of the mentors will advise, find a co-founder with complementary skills. Don't have two business guys, don't have two engineers, because you want to have complementary skills so that you can cover more of the business functions. And how you talk to somebody is giving up a job at, well-paying job at Apple, Facebook, Google, to take basically at the beginning, probably like a non-salary job with your startup, because they believe in your vision. So that's very important.
Okay, so we have a good chat about in your last 20 years, you have the ability to spot winner founders in your first meeting and sometime in the first 30 to 60 minutes. And that's make you one of the best winner detectives, in the VC world. Most founder pitching you reach that Series A is outstanding smart entrepreneurs. How do you go on to pick the smartest and the best of the smart founders? And you mentioned it comes down to two critical elements. Can you explain it?
Well, first of all, I will categorically deny that, I'm the best at doing that. I've just been doing it longer. It's one of those things where, yeah, I play golf, and I'm decent because I've been playing it for 20 years. But, there's golfers that are, in their early teens or 7 or 8 years old that are just brilliant at what they do. Um, I think at the end of the day, what I will say is that, over time, you build a certain level of pattern recognition, right? So you build a database because if you think about it, on an average day in the life of a VC, you're trying to meet, let's say, a couple of companies a day, right? And in a week, that's 10 companies. In a year, that's 500 companies. And, if you do that for 20 years, that's a lot of companies. That's 1,000 companies that you'll meet. And if you meet 1,000 companies, 1,000 founders, at some point, you'll develop a certain level of pattern recognition. The same way that if you play golf for 20 years, even though my swing is a mess, I'll somehow be able to make contact, right? And so when you ask me about how I'm able to identify, well, first of all, depending on the sector and the problem they're trying to solve, the different backgrounds and experiences are all going to vary, right? But the commonality that I was trying to point to earlier is that it doesn't matter if the startup is a semiconductor startup or a device company or even a gaming or an app company. There is the founder with that raw intelligence that can articulate very convincingly why this is a relevant problem they're trying to solve and articulate the solution that makes sense, right? And then, finally, as I said, having the ability and the charm and the charisma to attract, the team around him as well as investors. Because at the end of the day, if you really think about it, what's the most important survival skill for a startup? The only reason that a startup fails is because they run out of cash. And, I've seen founders that have the uncanny ability, even with a product launch failure, even with massive customer complaints, even with, management team issues, that because they're so good at what they do in terms of sharing the vision and convincing investors, that they have multiple shots on goal. And that's a skill. One of the things that I will say specifically about hardware, I think we all know and understand that hardware is very capital intensive, right? We talked about this best over the phone. It's probably another order of magnitude in terms of cost to actually develop a product, It's another order of magnitude to actually take it to market. It's another order of magnitude to mass produce over software, comparisons, right? And so the ability to be able to fundraise, in my opinion, is one of the most important skills, especially more so for hardware entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Jay.
Anyone want to add? Now you explain hardware startup are much harder because it takes 5 million to run a hardware campaign, more than 10 million to launch a hardware product, and eventually you will need, somewhere 100 million over time. And software only needs, 500,000 to reach a beta, less than 2 million to launch a software product, and less than 1% of hardware startups solve the right problem, target a big enough market, and have the right team. Can you share, the extra quality that a hardware founders need, and what are the hurdles hardware founders have to overcome?
Yes, I think I've already answered the question before you asked the question. And that one thing, again, I'll iterate, is the ability to attract capital. If you're in the hardware space and you can't raise funding, or you don't enjoy raising funding, it's anybody that's on the top quartile of the skill and will to fundraise, if you're not there as a hardware entrepreneur, forget it. Don't even start.
Okay, that's very good for the audience to really think about what you want to do,
Yeah,
for
and,
the
and,
product.
and I think, King mentioned, I think it was discussed earlier by Edward, like, there's certain, founders that maybe are engineers or product types. And I've actually worked with entrepreneurs that have amazing product, expertise, built beautiful products. One particular one that I'm still very sore about is a company called Teforia. This was a tea brewing machine. I still have one at home. I'm a big tea fan. It's an amazing product and it's beautiful. The problem is, if the founder is, a great product person and whatnot, but doesn't enjoy fundraising, doesn't like talking to entrepreneurs or promoting the product, then at some point that's going to be a problem. And ultimately, the company will fail because you run out of cash.
I love that product, Jay, by the way.
Yeah, it's my, yeah.
But I
Don't
talked
even get me started.
I talked to that guy about manufacturing, and you're exactly right. He good product could never really fundraise,
Yeah.
The other thing, Jay, that I find, some founders can take a company so far, but then they need to hire like a chairman or a CEO that can actually get them to that next round of funding. And so they need to work with their VC partners to try to maybe find this one person that can help them get to that next level of funding. I see this quite often.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, having said that, I'll give you a counter example to my own example. Okay. So there's one particular founder that I know really well. I didn't end up investing in a company. Unfortunately, I invested in a competing company in the same category. And I regret it because I would have made far more money if I invested in Fitbit. And Fitbit, if you know James Park, he's actually an introvert. He's not a big fan of meeting people in general, let alone pitching to investors. So for a founder like that, what do you need to do? Well, you need to actually have a product that is so unique and new to the market, and execute really, really well with a great team. Then the numbers speak for themselves. So they were never, after they launched, they were so successful, they were never dependent on external funding. They raised capital because they needed to grow faster, but they didn't need to raise capital to survive. And so you can either be so good at what you're doing in terms of product market fit, execution, and whatnot, that your business is growing so rapidly that people are going to throw money at you. But most cases, you typically need second and third chances, because to get it perfectly right on the first go is such a rarity. And that's why the ability to raise capital is so important.
Hey, Jay, I have a question for you about founders. So one of the things when I talk to founders, I always ask them about their emotional involvement,
Mm.
right? And um, I've met founders who will ride it into the ground because they're emotionally tied to this company. And so these are the companies I kind of shy away from doing business with. I rather have a founder who's passionate about his business, but he knows what his limits are and he knows when to get out. How do you feel about this kind of uh, founder?
You know what? That's a really, really interesting question. And I'm just thinking back in terms of the founders. You know, I think a lot of the obsessive founders, the positive is, they'll never give up, they'll keep going. But what I've also found is the downside to those kind of founders is
Right.
that they have a really hard time letting go and delegating.
Yes. This is
Right. And so if you think about a personality trait where they're kind of obsessive to a point where, they're never going to give up is a positive. But what that also means is that they're probably going to micromanage, never delegate. And it's very difficult to build a strong team around those kind of founders. And so again, going back to, what I said earlier about what I look for is, if somebody is really, really smart beyond being obsessive and understands their limits and weaknesses and has the ability to identify, what gaps to fill and has the ability to attract these people, those are the companies that I think have been more successful. Again,
I agree.
case in point to James at Fitbit. I mean, he supplemented himself with a very, very experienced and strong management team that did all the external bound communication, talked to investors and whatnot. And he was smart enough to understand what his weaknesses are and what his strengths were.
Yeah, my company happens to manufacture some of those, right? And I
Yeah,
can
of
tell you,
course.
the operations people he hired,
Oh, top notch, right?
world-class, top-notch
Exactly.
operations people. He
We
was
were able
smart
to get
enough to
some
go
of
out and
those
find
folks
them.
to work with us in Molecule. That's why they're doing so well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We should talk about Molecule someday, you and I, Jay.
You probably know more about what actually is happening than I do.
Yeah, yeah, maybe. Cannot confirm or
Actually, a
deny.
good example is Google, right? When Eric Schmidt was brought in as the outside CEO over Larry and Sergey, right? And they were
Yeah,
okay because they still have control of the interests of the company, even though, and I think they realized they were just still on the learning path to be a professional executives running a multi-billion-dollar company that Eric had experience at Sun Microsystem and then turned around Nobel. And then I
yeah.
think, yeah, I mean, it would be a whole different story if they held, hung on to the to Google and to say they want to continue to run it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of founders, the ones that I've been attracted to in the past, they've also been teachable, so that when somebody says to them, "Hey, maybe you should look at this or that," they can pause and look at it and really take it under advisement. And so, these are the kinds of founders that I look for when I do an investment deal or manufacture for somebody.
Well,
Just
let's
to add to Jay's point a little bit, sometimes I think we also have to look at the different cycle of the technology evolutions, right? So why software takes a lot less capital these days? Think about dot-com days, not too long ago, 20 years ago, right? Most of the dot-com company, pets.com, Webvan, they raised tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars because there was no cloud. They had to build their own server. They have to host it. They have to write their own software. So software was expensive until the cloud became available, and then next thing you know, you got iOS and Android. Oh, I got the two platforms. I don't have to write to proprietary, operating system. I could just build on Android and iOS, and they cover 99% of the market share, right? On the hardware side, I think it's difficult to have that kind of dynamic shifts that people, but it is getting that way because a lot of the design, especially in sensors, they have been shrunk down to so small that companies can actually do modules integrating different sensors together and build wearable device IoT devices that they would have to spend a lot more money to do core R&D in the past. So I think there is still opportunity for the for the hardware side of the company to to find the right problem. The main thing is the problem big enough to attract customers, right? Investors, not investors and customers.